Professor Wolff, you're from the US. What do you think about the competition between Apple Pay and also Samsung Pay in your market?
Yeah, so thanks for having me. Great to be here. Look, we always welcome competition. We did have some competition. Apple Pay itself was deeply influenced and to some extent inspired partially by Google Wallet, which is now Android Pay. So we did have some competition. More is always better. Samsung's done something very interesting here. So they also have significant market share, not as high a percentage as they do in China. And Android is a little bit less than half, or about half the US market, as opposed to the much larger share it often is around the world. But what Samsung's done that's interesting, and we'll see how it fares in China, it's fared well here and in South Korea, is they don't really require you to use NFC. So Samsung Pay is NFC, or near field communication ready, but it also has something called MST. It can clone on the screen a magnetic strip, and so it can basically be a more ubiquitous form of payment. And historically, the more places you can use a new form of payment, the more likely you are willing to adopt it.
Mr. Huang, this is interesting because in the US there might be more competition among different kinds of players in the market. However, in China, the amount of people that have been using these options are gigantic. And also people jump on new things. Apple Pay, for example. I've been going to some of the delis around the corner. They only accept now Apple Pay. But whether that's typical or not is another question. The question is, what would this kind of competition mentioned by Professor Wolff mean for the Chinese market?
I think China's market is quite different. I think for the online payment, it's pretty much dominant by Alipay and the Tencent Pay.
Those are Chinese ones, of course.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I doubted that this Apple Pay or Samsung Pay will have any significance for the users and that they have online payment. On the other hand, for the ordinary retail market, as you mentioned, this is going to have some impact because so far the Alipay and Tencent Pay do not have much of an impact, and then for the retail side of it.
Will that be, though, the retail sector, significant in the overall picture?
It's still quite big, and although we know online payment, e-commerce is more and more popular in China, but this is beyond just the normal and retail industry. For example, and I believe Apple Pay and Tencent Pay all use an NFC, the near field communication. The NFC can be extended beyond the retail. For example, you can go to like a bus or subway. You got an NFC, and you can use then your smartphone as the payment. So instead of having a separate cards for the public transportation, you can imagine this may grow into other adjacent area as well.
That's very interesting. Professor Wolff, from the Chinese market, you see different kinds of adaptive innovation. This is very fast in China. But when it comes to original ideas, of course, North America and Japan is still the place to go. Having said that, though, what do you expect these kinds of payment on the smartphone system to evolve? How is it likely? What kind of potential does it really have, business model-wise, and also in terms of bringing in others as a platform?
Yeah, so I think we see enormous potential here, and I think that's true in South Korea, I think it's true in China, I think it's true in the US and Japan. I don't think so I agree that it's a bit different in each place, but I don't think it's one country. The other area we haven't mentioned so far, which we should, is in-app purchases. And part of what everyone's fighting for is be the default payment system in your phone. Because while there's lots of e-commerce, most of that, the fastest area of growth there is what we sometimes call M, or mobile commerce, done on a mobile device, tablet or smartphone. And while there's lots of brick and mortar retail, we expect that will also perhaps lose market share to mobile commerce and e-commerce. Still big business, and the mobile part, native mobile, is huge, so in-app purchases will be huge. But I think that we also see real potential here. Partly, look, in the initial days, and still to some extent, Apple Pay is about making sure that you want to upgrade your iPhone and that you want an Apple phone, right? And it's another reason to keep you in that system.
Right.
For the foreseeable future and for now, 75+% of Apple's biggest in the world annual and quarterly sales numbers and profit numbers, both record breakers, come from basically two products: the phone and the sort of plus or larger screen model of phone. Anything and everything they can do to keep you in that ecosystem, they're going to do. Samsung is following that lead. Also, Samsung Pay, at least for now, probably not for long, but for now, only works on the newest high-end phones. But Samsung's trying to build a universal solution. Apple's trying to build another reason for you to buy an iPhone.
Right. That's an important point, Mr. Huang. It is not just the customer loyalty that we are talking about through the different kinds of new ways to serve the customers, but also you see the Apple's recent campaign go against the US government, FBI, in terms of so-called protecting the rights of its individual consumers. Having said that though, will this kind of practices be sustainable in terms of guarantee customer loyalty? If one could do it, the other would do that as well, and therefore your so-called favorable position will lose overnight, will be lost overnight rather.
You're absolutely right. And right now it looks like this NFC and also the Apple Pay or Samsung Pay is the way to keep customer loyal. But pretty soon, I'm pretty sure we can get a Huawei's phone, also have a Huawei Pay, and I think that the NFC will become a default features for every smartphone, at least for mid-layer to higher layer on the smartphones. Pretty soon, I imagine probably 90% of the smartphone all have NFC built in. So this is become standard features. So this won't become like a major differentiator.
So if that is the case, Professor Wolff, for all of these investments and attention needs being created by the company on these specific characteristics, I guess they have to measure very well as to the short term and the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a sort of long term is, can we get people to adopt a technology that does something else for us that we couldn't do before? And let's remember something else. Whoever runs the payment processing system, whether that's Samsung or Huawei or Apple or anyone else that we've imagined so far and discussed or that we haven't, Google, what have, they also control the information. So they will know who buys what, when, where, and how. And that is incredibly powerful, incredibly valuable information, because I would have micro information on exactly what you buy and, by the way, what you pay for it at all times. That's hugely valuable. And the other thing we should mention is if people move away to cash, away from cash to these things, it also gives tax authorities and governments much deeper, much better information about what's going on and what their populations are doing.
But that's almost like credit card in a way. Would that have a much bigger impact of getting to know what the consumer's informations are? And consumers, if they don't want to, they can choose to pay cash or use other means so that their information will not be revealed to one specific service on the smartphone. And they could use varied kinds of smartphones in order to pay for what they really want to pay if they don't want the record to be controlled by just one or two.
I mean, there are always many ways around any of these things, but one of the things that would be more information rich is most credit cards don't come with a locational tracking device. The app on your phone can tell me everywhere you went, every other app you opened, and potentially also every email you sent and received, every text message and every phone call. And credit cards generally don't have those kind of capabilities.
Mr. Huang, I've been always thinking about this for quite some time, because every time when one new product come out on our smartphone, or a big product pushed out by Apple or Samsung, the world's media seems to be so happy in jumping on it and do free promotion for it overnight. But I just wondered, how smart are we really by doing it? And also the public, how smart are we in terms of easily accepting one product pushed forward by these new tech giants, how much do we know about our rights before we are using it? And how much responsibility these giants should have and could have in terms of briefing their customers about what the rights are? Have we reached to this stage? Have we reached to this stage?
I think this is a convoluted question. The first of all, I think is some of the features they push down. Some of them are successful. Some of them are not so successful. We understand that. I think this payment is going to be very popular. You're right in terms of consumer rights. That is, I think, a very big challenge, how to protect the consumers' rights. In particular, lots of services are free, offered. And then in return, the underlying statement is you got to sacrifice some of your secrecy, privacy, etc., in exchange for these free services.
But that was the underlying, it was not clearly stated.
Correct. And then I think maybe little bit exaggerating, I would say today, almost all those features offered to us, like default features, we have to be very, very careful. I would say almost all of them contains some abuse of their power. So we have to be very, very careful when we say select a yes.
Yes, but you know, Professor Wolff, what can you do? I mean, all of them are doing that. They're not briefing our specific rights very clearly. And if you go from one to the other, despite the competition, they're doing the same. So are we being left with much choices, or actually we're being left with much fewer choices these days than we used to have?
Yeah, so it's a good point. There are many who do it, but there are also big and meaningful differences. So there's a gray scale here. There probably aren't white and black, you know, not the extremes, like you say, but there's a difference. Some companies are better custodians of data than others. And remember, not everything is malicious. Sometimes your biggest risk is incompetence. Sometimes people aren't so good at securing their data, and we have hacks and things like that.
Right.
So it's not always that the company intentionally misuses their data. They may also be irresponsible in terms of their securing of that data. That's an actual issue, and companies aren't the same there. And then the other area I would mention is, just because we have a pattern of some companies violating individuals' rights, maybe we don't need to throw our hands up and just walk away and decide our rights will be violated. We could try to change some of the corporate social responsibility practice, or have it even of voluntary standards. The last thing I would mention, the way I try to model and understand this stuff, is the following. Everybody has a currency they're not aware they have. If you're online and the product is free, that's because you're the product. And what's happening is you're buying things with your privacy, you're just not being told, and you're not being given a choice.
That's right.
I think we need to start telling people and give them a choice.
All right, let me ask you about the choice question before we go very briefly from you, Professor Wolff. What would you choose? You know, Apple Pay, Samsung Pay, Alipay, Tencent Pay, or some of the Google products. Which one would you choose where you would just sit there and throw all of them away, pay your cash?
So I like cash. I think there's still a place for cash. I think it's actually a civil rights thing. We should keep cash. But I do use the other things as well. I use Apple Pay because I happen to randomly have an iPhone.
Right.
I like the other systems too. But I just circling back, there's always a small number of people who like all the gadgets because they love to play with them. These gadgets don't matter unless other people use them for convenience.